Hey, it's Digital Noise! We're back! Oh my god, look who it is! It's John Golson! Sir John Golson! Oh god, you're terrifying me. What is that?
Huh? I'm happy. I'm happy
Oh,
to
that
be here. It's
that's
called a
happy?
smile. You just haven't seen smiles from people in a long time, but that's what they look like. Just a mess of teeth and muscle. That's just that's a smile.
When I do that at my cats, they're like, they go running. They're like, meow! I'm like, what?
Like, aren't we're primates, right? Like, are humans primates? Or it's like, I don't know.
What, something.
Are we primates?
I think we're
It's
primates.
the point is, it's funny that primates have the show of teeth is like a sign of aggression, and we're supposed to be the closest to primates, but ours is like a sign of friendliness.
Yeah, got confused somewhere along the
Yeah.
line. I don't know. Maybe it was like, maybe when we started forming more teams, it became like, yeah, let's go get them.
Maybe so. So yes, Chris, I hope you were stunned by my aggressive display. It means that I'm going to come and take your food and children.
I was, and I was like, "Come get it, man. It's fine. I won't do anything to stop you. It's. I'm like 50 now. I'm preparing for death, so it's all good." How was your Halloween?
Oh, it was pretty good. I stayed home. I watched a lot of movies.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of movies. Just
What'd
kind
you
of
see?
like stuff I hadn't seen. I watched a 1973 movie called Frightmare, and I watched the
That I've
Netflix
seen.
original, his house or his home.
Yeah, I know his house. I think that's a brand new one.
Watched that one. Terrible poster. Absolutely terrible movie poster. It has
But
the two actors standing in a group of children that aren't even like in the movie or have anything to do with the movie, not even the right race of the refugees from the movie. It's a very, very strange movie poster.
okay,
But a great debut feature.
okay. What else?
Oh gosh, I watched Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires.
Oh wow, I haven't
I
seen that in a long
watched,
time.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. I watched John Carpenter's The Fog.
Nice.
Not a favorite. I hadn't seen it in about 20 years.
I rewatched it myself not that long ago. I was like, I know a lot of people love this one, but this is always going to be for Carpenter's like most febrile period. I think it is his weakest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else did I see? I saw Return of the Living Dead 3, which I like a lot.
I've still never seen the third
Oh,
one.
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. It's
Everyone
wild.
says,
Very,
everyone
very
says that.
gory. Yeah. And then I feel like I'm forgetting one. I don't know. I feel like I'm forgetting one, and I don't know what I'm forgetting.
Well, if it
Because
comes
I've
to you
forgotten
later,
it.
you can tell me. But
All right.
I did the same thing as you. I sat at home. We made like black bean enchiladas and ate a little bit of candy. And I watched Triggered, which hasn't actually come out yet, about a bunch of guys who have kids who find a maniac puts bombs on them, but every time they kill another one, they get their time. So it's kind of a battle royale thing. Can't
You know-
talk about it yet because it hadn't been released, and I'll get in trouble. But
I got a press release about it, but there's been so many comedy specials called Triggered this year that I ignored the press release because I thought it was yet another thing called Triggered, and it
That's
is, I
very
guess,
fair.
yet another thing called Triggered. But I didn't even look at it, so that's on me.
I watched the Shutter film that was there. They did because they were running films and having panels all through Halloween on their live at Shutter thing on their channel, and so they had a secret screening, which I wish that I'm like, why didn't everybody do this? This is such a great idea, where it was just like the one time and you have to watch it live on
It
the
was really
channel.
cool.
And it was a film called Lucky, was starring Brea Grant, and I believe she wrote it as well. And it was a very meta feminist thing about horror parable about a girl who keeps having a killer show up to her house every single night over and over again. Even if she decidedly kills him, his body isn't there the moment she turns her head away. And then he just comes back the next day, a guy with a mask. So it's obviously kind of surreal. And there's a sequence where she's in a garage and everywhere she looks there's a woman being attacked by her own masked killer, And I mean, you can kind of see where this is going. And it was okay. It was like one of those like great idea, well executed. You had no idea how to end it.
I started it. I started it and thought it was fine, but ended up I got really extraordinarily tired yesterday and kind of went to bed a little early. I actually went back and looked at the list of movies I watched. I didn't watch anything else. That was it. I cut my night short after the screening started. I saw about 30 minutes of it, then I went on to bed.
Fair. And then I saw 1973's Messiah of Evil, which has been on my list forever to watch. Is like they said like, oh, if you like surreal horror, it's great, and it was. It was bottom dollar cheapo that was kind of fucking brilliant. I'm like, I recommend to anyone who likes Carnival of Souls or David Lynch's weirder stuff. I'm like, you should totally check this out. This is actually kind of cool. I'm like, why hasn't someone remade this movie? I'm really curious.
I don't think I've seen it.
I want to say a lot of stuff in it predates some of the zombie stuff that Romero did, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, well worth seeing. I saw a film that I didn't hear anybody recommending it, but when I found out about it, I was like, I got to watch this one way or the other, which is called The Monster Club, where Vincent Price is a vampire and he bites John Carradine, and who's a horror writer, and he's like, oh, I'm not going to kill you. I'm just a sampler. Why don't you come with me to this disco fucking, or this new wave monster club, a la the title, and where Vincent Price can sit and tell him stories that relate to monsters they literally made up for this movie as the progeny of like the math of what happens when different monsters mate with each other. And it is weird. It is definitely PG, like it's for kids, like no question. And it was very funny. I don't know if it was good, but I liked it.
I have a big soft spot for that movie.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's not an Amicus production, but it's from the Amicus producers. I guess Amicus didn't exist at that point, had already folded or whatever, but it's basically the talent there. And then the writer, Art Chetwynd Hayes, it's his stories that are adapted. Has UB40 is one of the bands that play at the club. Our friend Zach Carlson has the painting of the family tree of monsters, the original prop painting of the family tree of monsters from that movie. It's a really cool, unique prop to own.
Yeah, very unique. It's so goofy, but it's really fun, and it's so Technicolor, and the bands are actually kind of good. Like, they all do a song about monsters, except for the one band who's, like, the best-known band in there, who does a song about being a stripper. Not really. I think that just leads into a visual joke, but...
Yeah.
They're like, wow, they're actually not bad. Like, the main song got stuck in our heads, and my wife was annoyed at me. She's like, God damn it, now that's going to be stuck in my head all week, and I don't even like it!
Is it the Monsters Rule song?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
it's like Brian Salisbury and I, after we saw New Year's Evil for the first time, and like for just 2 weeks after, we're like, I've been through the night, it's New Year's Evil, like all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's the reason I bring that up, is because that leads us into the actual talking about the Blu-rays we're here to review. Because we're talking about a lot of like, this might as well be a VH1 I Remember the 80s episode, it feels like, right? At least to start with.
I remember the 80s.
Yeah, me too. Some of it's fuzzier than other parts. But I was just a teenager when the movie Gotcha came out, and boy, did I like it. It's 1984. I was 14 years old. The idea of people wandering around college campuses with paintball guns playing the game Assassin, this was new to me. I was like, wait, that's a thing? And they're like, yeah, people actually do that, which they did, in fact. And this wasn't even the first movie about it. There was another movie called Tag, the Assassination Game, with Linda Hamilton in it that's about the same thing. But ultimately, that's just kind of a sideline where they call the game Gotcha here to the actual plot, which is a globe-spanning adventure with young Anthony Edwards, who was coming off of Revenge of the Nerds the year before. I'm sorry, that was 1984. This was 1985. So he was like, oh, people knew who Anthony Edwards was at this point. This was the same director as that film, Jeff Canoe. So it was like, oh, let's see what happens next. And it featured a young-ish Linda Fiorentino, who this was pretty much like the same year as her film debut, which was Vision Quest in 1985. She went on from here to be briefly a huge star before she just kind of stopped being a huge star. I don't know what happened there. You remember when she was like Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct level huge for like 5 minutes and then nothing?
You know, I think any of those actresses that did a lot of Weinstein stuff in the 90s that vanished probably have stories as to why they vanished. That would be my guess about Fiorentino. I don't know. I haven't seen anything out there. But much like child stars who grew up to be broken adults, it usually has something to do with what was happening to them when they were child stars. I just feel like, I assume that she has seen and experienced a lot in her career that might have turned her off of the business as a whole. Uh, I don't know that that's true. I would just assume that based on the kind of movies she was making and some of the studios she was making them for.
Yeah, they put
So,
her down on the list immediately of like sexy, like woman not afraid to do extensive nudity and sex scenes in a film,
yeah.
but is also a good actress. So she was kind of would be in A-list Hollywood productions, but that were marketed towards the what do you call it? What was the Kim Basinger Mickey Rourke film?
Oh, 9.5 weeks.
Yeah, it's marketed towards the 9.5 weeks segment of the theater going population, if you will.
Yeah.
But Gotcha is not one of those movies. This is
Speaking of a
actually
great theme song,
that's what I was going to say is because we were talking about how the song got stuck in our heads with those movies.
Gotcha!
This song
Yeah.
immediately, like I'm like as it's playing, I'm like, oh fuck, I forgot about this song, which is just a complete brainworm of a tune, and I actually like it. But then again, I was around when it came out by British singer Teresa Bazar. It never really went huge beyond this movie, but boy, it was stuck in my head for a good portion of my life. And it's been so long since I saw this, I actually forgot about that. And I still am singing it here weeks later after watching this movie again. But yeah, so Anthony Edwards, he goes to college. He's like, oh, I want to go. He's in college. He's like, I want to go during break to Paris with his roommate Nick Corey, who was I believe the first guy to die or the first man to die in Nightmare on Elm Street, the original movie. And there he meets Linda Fiorentino, who's a Czech girl, and she's like, oh, I like the innocent American boys. And so right off the bat, she's like, all right, virginity, mine, bitch. But like, yeah, sure, I'll hang out with you. And she's like, well, I've got to go to West Berlin. And his friend's like, well, I'm going to Spain like our plan was. And, I mean, Anthony Edwards like, I'm going to keep having sex with Linda Fiorentino, and who could blame him? And he starts, really falling for her in West Berlin. It becomes clear, at least to us, oh, she's a spy. There's spy shit going on. And all this leads to him having to escape from there, like not knowing what happened to her, coming back, people chasing him, his gotcha skills coming into play. Like, oh, I'm actually kind of good at running and shooting. And what makes for a harmless and fun little movie, with the possible exception of the ending shot, which is a little abusive.
But it is one of those kind of movies that at the very beginning, I thought, I bet this ends with him like shooting somebody and saying "gotcha" and then like freeze frame and like the credits roll. I was like 98% accurate, just barely off of what that final shot of the movie is. This was a first time for me. I knew it from the light gun game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. I was aware of it from there. And that game was basically just a paintball game. It wasn't tied into the movie in any specific way, other than I think the timing of release. So you could go to the movies and watch Gotcha, and then you could go to the electronics counter at Sears and buy Gotcha out of the glass case where they kept all the Nintendo games back in the day. I did not enjoy this. This is like one of those, these two guys are like super horny. They're only motivated by sexual activity, and then one of them gets like kind of puppy dog in over his head and goes on this like international adventure that and you kind of wait for it because you're like, what was the opening 30 minutes of the movie like? What was all this stuff about them playing paintball at Harvard? Like, what did that have to do with anything? And then when it comes back, it's like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. This concept of like, oh, okay, now we see like remember when we set up all the paintball stuff? Well, here you go. Here's the payoff for all the paintball stuff. Remember when he was popping out of garbage cans to shoot paintballs at people? Now watch this. It was corny. It was cheesy. It was a little too. It was just a little too ugly American for me to like really get into it. I kind of didn't like him, and I think that has a lot to do with whether or not you get into the movie. And I think especially in 2020, it's a little bit of a hurdle to go like I'm sorry, but running around an Ivy League school shooting people with realistic guns as a sport is very white privilege in the year 2020. There's
Yeah.
just no getting around that at
First
all.
thing you think is that dude'd be dead inside of 5 minutes.
Yeah. He's running around campus and he has, what looks like an actual handgun, and he's like shooting people, and that's just what people do in the courtyard of an Ivy League school. And then the fact that his motivation was all sexual, like it's he goes on this big espionage adventure, but it all goes back to the fact that he catches a feeling for this girl that he's been laid up in a hotel room with, like, screwing for a couple days.
Do you
I
not
didn't think
remember
it
what
was.
it was like to be 19, John?
When I was 19, I might have written a movie like this. Like, I feel like I go back and read stuff that I wrote then, and I'm like, I just want to bury it. Like,
Yeah.
not spend millions of dollars and cast Anthony Edwards and Linda Fiorentino in it. I didn't. It is harmless. I think more or less, like, it's just a matter of what kind of mood it catches you in, and I don't have any particular nostalgia for it. I certainly saw I certainly saw worse from the '80s in this very stack that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
I will remember it, and I can certainly see why. Sometimes a movie just, like, you can just see why people like it, even if it doesn't hook you. And it's not a matter of it being good or not. It's just a matter of, like, I get it. It's just, if I
Not
would
for
have, like, how different would it have been? Am I British now? How different would it have been if I had seen this movie at age 14? How different would I feel about it if this was like a cable mainstay that I happened to catch? I might not have been able to see it because it was R-rated. I would assume that was the case. R ratings were real touch and go when I was growing up in the '80s.
And
But
you're a little bit younger than me, so you
little
would have
bit,
been like probably 10 or so when this came out.
yeah.
So I wouldn't have been allowed to see it then either, but I said 14 before, but I was 15. So that was old enough, right? I guess I saw it.
I certainly remember the VHS box with Linda Fiorentino. Like, isn't she like laying in a bed and she's holding the gun, and like Anthony Edwards is like over by the window?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's Paris out the window. You see, I mean, that I feel like that box was ubiquitous. Like, every single video store across the country all had a copy of Gotcha.
Yeah.
How I avoided it for so long, even having played the game, how I avoided it for so long, I have no idea. It's odd. It's especially odd. I knew about Tag, but had forgotten about Tag. It's really weird that there are two of these.
Yeah. And very close together. I've never seen Tag. I know about it for years. It's one of those, like, man, I should probably watch that just for completion's sake. And plus, young Linda Hamilton, I can watch that. That's good. But everything you're saying, I don't disagree with,
It's
John.
slick. It's
But
a slick movie.
But I'd like I was afraid rewatching. I'd hate it, and I've because a lot of times you're like, oh, nostalgia, and makes you think things are better than they really were. But I was like, I could see everything wrong with this movie and still really enjoy it with rewatching. And maybe, like, nostalgia is rose-colored glasses, which sometimes makes you not able to see that red flags are red, as it were, because they're rose-colored glasses. But yeah, there's some problematic stuff, but nothing that's like really incredibly grossly problematic stuff here. It's like college students running around trying to get laid. Well, that's college, no matter what age you're living in. But yeah, I mean, there's like the ending shot is him not just shooting a girl's ass with a paintball, but with a fucking tranquilizer dart because she turned him down for a date earlier in the film. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? I had to listen to both of the two commentaries on here just going, somebody call this shit out. And both of them are like, oh, it's different times, harmless, boys will be boys. I'm like, come on, dudes. Just say, that's not good.
It was definitely a case of, like, with a Chekhov's gun, it was like Chekhov's tranquilizer dart and tiger. I thought the tiger was actually going to come back into it because I was like, there's no way they're showing all this tiger stuff without this coming back in. It ended up being, I was somewhat close. It was, they're showing all this to show that he knows how tranquilizers work.
Right.
Yeah, it was, my favorite part of the whole thing was when he was going back and forth across the border at Berlin, like crossing the border, and there's the woman at the window who gives him a hard time about the change and all that stuff. All that played really well for me. It gets really long in the tooth. I think the back half of it is like, it kind of ends up in this weird void where he comes back to the States, and then he tells his parents everything that happened that we already saw in the movie. There's like a scene literally where he just explains everything we just watched to his parents. Mm-hmm. And I was going, why is this in here? Like, why wasn't this cut out of the film? Why are we hearing a synopsis of everything we just watched? And I think all of that stuff, when he comes back to the States, a lot of that could be trimmed because it's not really funny. It recaps a lot of what already happened. Could have been shorter. Nobody's going to go back and cut this thing, so what am I even talking about? It could have been shorter, but...
Well, it played for me, and there's
I'm
two
going to do a fan edit.
No one's doing a fan edit. There's two commentaries. One's, they're both new. One is with the director talking about how Revenge of the Nerds made it possible for him to shoot this, which obviously for a lot of people was just like, yay, vacation in Europe. There's a second one where an entertainment journalist and author, Brian Reisman, shares information about the production of it and the history of it and yada yada. Let's move on to another 80s movie. This one from director John Badham, legendary director of Dracula, Blue Thunder, War Games, Short Circuit, Stakeout, Saturday Night Fever, directing Michael J. Fox and James Wood in a mismatched buddy cop comedy called The Hard Way. Now look, I actually talked to Brian Salisbury from Junk Food Cinema. I was like, Brian, I got this movie The Hard Way. I know you love this movie. There's no way you don't love this movie. Like, this has got Brian Salisbury movie written all over it. If you want to borrow my copy to do a Junk Food Cinema with, you can. He's like, yeah, I do love that movie, Chris, but I don't think we can talk about it because it's wildly offensive. I was like, is it? And so I watch it and I go, maybe you're remembering this wrong, dude, because, I mean, yeah, James Woods is about the very definition of like one of the biggest asshole actors who's ever lived in real life, certainly more now than he ever was at this period when he was getting work. He's like hardcore right-wing, loud Trump supporter type. But I didn't really think this was offensive. It's very 1980s, or in this case 1991, which still feels exactly like the 80s, mismatched buddy cop action comedy film covered with neon, silly jokes, but never found it offensive. It follows a serial killer named the Party Crasher, who played by Stephen Lang, a young Stephen Lang, who is showing up and just murdering people when he's daring. He's got like a cat and mouse thing that he's encouraging with James Woods' character, who's like, the hard-bitten, cynical cop. And he just can't seem to catch him. Meanwhile, in Hollywood, Nick Lang, played by Michael J. Fox, is this huge movie star who is known as an Indiana Jones type character in a bunch of action films, but he wants to be taken more seriously and not just play sequels to that character's films. So he had heard about this cop that James Woods is in real life, apparently quite famous and controversial, was like, I'm going to go there to New York City and shadow him and be his friend. And apparently he's like friends with the mayor of New York City, and he's friends with the captain of the thing. So everybody loves Nick except for James Woods, who doesn't like Hollywood. He doesn't like happiness or joy. He doesn't like anything. Now, of course, something's got to bring them together. And that's where this thing falls weakest, is Annabella Sciorra, who's a girl who just incomprehensibly is interested in James Woods' character here and is first starting to attempt to date him, and he really likes her a lot, cynical about it working out. But it's, of course, that, oh, don't worry, Nick is good at relationships, he'll help you make things work, and that's the weakest stuff. But on the whole, I love the whole 80s 90s mismatch buddy action cop comedy thing like a lot, and I think this is a pretty solid movie. John, I bet, disagrees.
Let me ask you a couple things. Do you think that the fake movies in the movie Hard Way look like Michael J. Fox vehicles?
Yeah, kinda.
Really?
I mean, not like ones he was... I should say they don't look like movies he was in. but they do look like movies that we would see coming out at that time. They look like God, what is those ones that were Raiders of the Lost Ark ripoffs, but go back.
There's like the Alan Quartermain ones.
Yeah, the Alan
with Richard
Quartermain shit.
Chamberlain.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing is, do you think that James Woods did a ride along with police so that he, as an actor, could learn how to act in this movie where he plays a cop?
Hadn't he already played a cop like 8 or 9
He's
times?
in a movie called
now?
Cop. He's in a movie just called Cop. Like, that's the name of it. It's like going to the grocery store and the box just says tomato soup or whatever.
Yeah, or food.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, he wouldn't have needed to do a ride along at this point of his career. He's played it so many times.
I thought that this was... it is a very big budget, early 90s buddy cop action comedy. And hits all those beats. Feels like, in some ways, if you are a fan of that specific type of movie, might be sort of a little hidden gem that you haven't seen before, because I don't think it made a lot of money even when it came out.
It wasn't a monster hit or anything. No.
My thing with it is how inauthentic it feels from top to bottom. And I get that it's a product, but it's a product based intrinsically on the belief of certain things within the film itself. So there's things in the film that have to be authentic for the film to work for me. One, I don't buy that the Michael J. Fox movie star character in the movie makes noirs and Indiana Jones knockoffs, because he looks like Michael J. Fox. Mm-hmm. He does not... Michael J. Fox wasn't being cast in those movies, and he's a real actor. Right. So it would then stand to reason that an actor who looked like Michael J. Fox, even in a movie universe, would be cast as teenagers or romantic leads, which is what Michael J. Fox was playing at the time. He was not playing noir detectives nor swashbuckling heroes. That's a hard pill to swallow when watching The Hard Way. The other half of the movie, which is the cop stuff, is movie cops. So you have constructed a world in which someone wants to learn what it's like to be a real cop, and then your other half of the movie is all fake bullshit cop. And my deal was like, there's a version of this movie somewhere in some earlier draft or in some alternate dimension where the cop stuff is treated like a real cop job. It's not. It's like, this is the guy that goes in and argues with... It's like a parody of a cop movie, right? But he goes in and argues with the chief, and he yells at reporters and tells them to tie your dick in a knot and all that kind of stuff. And
that's the joke, though. That's the joke in the movie, is that it's meta in that way. I don't think the movie ever pretends that's what cops are really like. I think it's like the whole time going... Because the whole movie is like an insider Hollywood movie in many ways. It's winking at the screen the whole time. I think it's very much supposed to be like... this ridiculous Hollywood actor with this ridiculous Hollywood cop, and like making fun of both of those cliched things. I thought that was the whole point.
I don't know that I'm as convinced. I think you're giving it a lot of credit, because I think that the cop stuff was written from a place... To me, it struck me as someone whose only experience with police stuff has been by consuming movies. Mm-hmm. And so the output of that is something that looks and sounds and feels like 100 other movies. But I get what you're saying. I just don't know that I see it. So it was getting to the nitty-gritty of whether or not I liked it. It was fine. I just found it a little hard to buy, and there was I don't know if it's the casting or what could have maybe quote-unquote fixed this, but I had a really hard time buying either James Woods and his world or Michael J. Fox and his world, and them kind of coexisting at the same time. I mean, I could enjoy all of the big early 90s, like, Bruckheimer style, like, car flippings and explosions and gunfights and all that kind of stuff. Like, totally, that stuff was, as polished as anything. But the two leads, like I just don't know, and I don't really. It's also a really odd pairing,
You might say they're
an odd couple, a
mismatched.
mismatch. I think the thing with James Woods too is for the longest time he played intensely unlikable characters, and you laughed it off because you thought there's no way that he's like that in real life.
And
And it's
then,
difficult now to even go back and watch his performances when you realize that it's just him.
yeah,
Like,
he was just playing himself.
yeah, it's trickier. It's harder to reconcile that when you're like, oh, that's just him turned up to 11. Like, he is a brittle asshole. It's not something that you can go like, haha, he's so fun to watch. It's like, no, he seems to treat people in everyday life like that, which is not so fun to watch. I would give this I kind of give this like a I have to say I would recommend it, especially if you have if you like the Beverly Hills Cop movies, you like Last Boy Scout, you like Lethal Weapon, and this is a blind spot. This will probably scratch a very, very specific itch for you if you've never seen this before. It was way bigger in action than I expected.
Yeah.
I knew it existed, but I thought it was more of an odd couple comedy and less of a pure 80s like buddy cop action film.
And that's where I think it ultimately worked for me, is that it did get that balance right. I think some of the weakest examples of this genre are the ones that get the balance wrong. They tip too far one way or the other. And I actually, like I said, overall, I found the mixture of like the comedy to the well filmed and shot action is pretty good here. Like big set pieces, ends on a huge set piece that you can see coming from the first 5 minutes of the film. You're like, there's no way they're not going to do that at the end of the movie. And sure enough, but you don't build that and then that's all you do with it. So
Oh, we should also mention like Delroy Lindo's in this, Christina
yeah.
Ricci's in this,
LL Cool J,
LL Cool
Luis
J's in this.
Guzman.
I think they only had the rights to Mama Say Knock You Out, so they just play it over and over and over throughout the movie. Yeah, it's a very unusual cast, and even the creative credits, like one of the producers was like DJ Caruso, and then like first AD was like Rob Cohen. It's a very strange mix of creatives on this film as well.
It is, and it, no question, was not a huge financial success. I think it came in third the week it was out. I mean, it made like 65 million, which is not bad for
That's
the
not
period
bad.
of
No,
time.
that's not bad at all.
So it wasn't a failure, but it wasn't the monster hit they were hoping for.
Yeah,
either.
no, that actually was higher than I thought.
Yeah. There are a few extra features here. There's a trailer. There's a commentary. It's brand new from John Badham, which I'm kind of surprised they were able to get him to come in to do one. Badham's never struck me as the type of guy who's like would care. You know, but he really gets into it the whole time. And then there's trailers for all the rest of the recent releases here from this company, including the next film we're going to talk about, which is another Michael J. Fox film from this same period of time, which is 1987's The Secret of My Success. But this is following not real far after the actual Secret of Michael J. Fox's success, which was, you know, in the end, Back to the Future, which was obviously a hit that very few other films could compare with in that decade as being as huge as it fucking was. So he tried a bunch of different stuff, and this was kind of like, hey, screwball comedies are kind of out of vogue, but I bet you we could bring them back. Like a fun little screwball comedy. Michael J. Fox seems fun. A romantic screwball comedy? Sure. We'll get like a Herbert Ross, who's worked a lot in theater. He can do a big flamboyant type thing. And this movie was not a hit among anyone, really, that, like, critics didn't really care for it. Audiences didn't go see it. I saw it like 3 times. Here's another one, John, that you're going to be like, Jesus fucking Christ, Cox. We usually agree on everything. What is it about the 80s? We're like,
Well, we have hit one that I saw. I saw this when I was a kid. Like, my good friend Matthew Ivory rented it, and we watched it over at his house. So this is one I'd actually seen before. Now it's at least been 1990. I may have seen it before then even, but it's been a long, long time.
Well, Secret of My Success follows Michael J. Fox, who's like, went to Kansas State University, and he's like, Mom, Dad, farmer, Mom and Dad, I'm moving to New York City, the big city. I'm gonna get in there, and I'm gonna make all the money at a huge business job, and I'm going to so I can pay you back for all the investment you put in me and how you believed in me. And he gets out there, it's like I'm like. And of course, nobody's hiring, right? They're like, we're not interested. You need some experience. He's like, well, I can't get experience unless you hire me, and no one will hire me because I don't have experience, yada, yada. So he's like, fuck, I'm going to have to fall on a distant relative, his distant uncle Howard, played by Richard Jordan, who's the CEO of the Pemrose Corporation, which was founded by his father-in-law. And he's married to Vera, played by Margaret, the really funny Margaret Whitten. And so, Michael J. Fox Brantley, most 80s name ever, is like, okay, I guess the guy who only give him a job is like in the mailroom. You have to work your way up, like I didn't. And he decides, well, fuck it, I'm just gonna pretend I'm a suit at this company. So he like has like it takes over an empty office and creates a fake identity for himself, and he falls for one of the actual big suits in the company, Christy, played by the wonderful Helen Slater. Man, Helen Slater had her moment of like, wow, she was in a bunch of stuff and she was great. Like Ruthless People, always going to be one of my favorite comedies of all time, starring her. But she's like, she takes business seriously. She wants nothing to do with them at first, but before you know it, the charm is there. But Brantley finds a weird situation where he's told, hey, as a mailroom employee, hey, you need to go out, they need a driver. The boss's wife, who he's not met yet, his aunt, he meets her. She doesn't know who he is. It's important that she not find out, but she's like, oh, after he compliments her repeatedly because she's mad at her husband, like, I'm too old, no one cares about me anymore. She's like, I'm gonna fuck this boy. And she does, in a way that definitely wouldn't happen today, but happened a lot back then. And he finds himself caught between the girl he really wants to be with and the girl who he's related to and shouldn't be sleeping with but can't seem to stop, and between the job he actually wants to have and the job he has to show up for in this screwball running around romantic comedy that definitely didn't work for a lot of people, but I've always found this fucking thing charming. I don't know what to tell you.
Good for you.
Now the retort.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
John's like, I hate it, and I think less of you for liking it.
I was shocked that this is a movie that has gracefully aged with historical perspective. Uh-huh. This is a very Reagan era movie about like clawing your way to the top with no other driver other than wealth. Like, do whatever you can to accumulate wealth. And it toes a hard line between being a farce and being aspirational. And I think that the trouble with the movie for me is that I don't think farces can be aspirational. I think they kind of have to pick a lane. And there's a lot of sort of like plucky. I think you really are supposed to like root for him, and it's very difficult to do so in 2020 AD, the year of our Lord. It's a very
don't bring
very
God
Reagan
into
movie.
this, John.
It's it feels like an extrapolation. I get why he would do this because it feels like a direct extrapolation of his Alex P. Keaton character from Family Ties.
Yeah,
like
totally.
What would happen if, other than changing the parents to being farmers, it feels very much like, okay, Alex P. Keaton leaves the house, now what happens? And the movie kind of has that flavor to it. Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties, for younger listeners, the gimmick of the Family Ties sitcom was that the parents were laid-back, chill, open-minded liberal hippies, and they were raising kids in the era of conservative Reaganism, and the kids were like gravitating towards those values, and the parents were doing everything they could to fight it, as opposed to most sitcoms where the parents are conservative and the kids rebel in their own way. That was the gimmick to Family Ties. Anyways, But this feels very Alex P. Keaton, so I get why he did it, and I get why this project even came to him in the first place. I thought this stinks. I'm sorry. I thought this stinks. I really didn't enjoy it at all, and kind of was sort of bemused by my younger self, because I actually remembered a lot of the movie. There was, sometimes you think it's funny. There's movies that I've seen 2-3 years ago, and I couldn't name you a detail in it, and I could sit and watch it, and it would be like it was all new. And then there's other movies that I saw like once, like 35 years ago, and for some reason, like, I know what the beats are. Like, yeah. I knew that he was going to have sex with his with the lady, and like everything that happened, I was like familiar enough with to go, oh, okay, yeah, I remember this.
It all came flooding back because you knew that it was a good movie when you were young, and now you're just too old and cynical.
Yeah, maybe I am too old and cynical. I did not enjoy it. I tell you what I did like. I did like the special features where Helen Slater also didn't enjoy it and hadn't seen it in a while. And I guess she had watched it right before the interview, and she was like, I used to do all these movies, and when you look back at them, some of them don't age so well. And this one in particular, and I appreciated that, actually. I think anytime you have a special feature where somebody is really like super honest about the work, I think is always, always, always refreshing. And it was good to hear from her, not just because she agreed with me, so hey, there's somebody on my side, but because I thought her an honest perspective was interesting too.
Hey, I am in the minority here. I'm the first to admit it. Decidedly in the minority of liking this movie. But I've just always found it charming. And once again, just like we were talking about before, everything you said, you're not wrong about it.
I'm honestly shocked you like it, because it is so Reagan-y. And that does not strike me as something you would sort of get into.
It's so Reagan era. But he's all the characters who are like, no matter what you do, as long as you make money, it's okay, are the villains here. Like it still goes, hey, it is about being successful, getting the girl and making a lot of money, but he doesn't do it in a way that's the bad guy, the Reagan way. You know what I mean? He's like, oh man, he did in fact put in the work, even if it was, short-term work by comparison. But, I didn't find it, it's decidedly Reagan era film, but I didn't find it offensively conservative.
I hated the music in this too.
Oh, come on, man. It has I Walking on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves. That's like one of the greatest songs ever.
I hated the music in this. Sorry. Oh, that's a perfectly fine song.
Or how about
there's some other songs in it. Yeah, they play that one. There's some other songs in it too. There's like a song that plays when he first moves to New York and is climbing the ladder. Mm-hmm. And I think the lyrics are literally like, you just moved to New York and you're climbing the ladder. And I was like, why pick
that's
the song?
The Secret of My Success, performed by Night Ranger, who, no matter what anyone says, we're not a good band.
Uh-oh.
Not a good band. Yeah, it's got, he's got like bands like Restless Heart and Bananarama, Pat Benatar, Roger Daltrey. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to defend the musical choices. That's about as subjective as you get. And a lot of it is indeed pretty 80s and pretty bad. But, you get pretty 80s and pretty bad, and even the really good 80s movies with pop, whenever there's a pop music song in it, because we didn't know what good music was in the 80s.
I think it was more the score. I mean, there were some song choices I didn't love, but it was also sort of just the kind of like easy listening, like saxophone score that was just like, no, thank you.
Fair enough. Well, I did not expect you to like that movie, John.
This is my anti-pick of the week.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect you to like it. I knew this would be the scenario. I thought, much like the previous two films, maybe I would look back and go, oh God, I'm so embarrassed I used to like this film, but I found I still enjoyed all three of these. So I don't know. But let's talk about a film that has actually aged better than it was when it came out in some ways. Maybe even it was a little prescient. I'm talking about Kevin Smith's Mallrats, which just got a huge Blu-ray release from Arrow. There was upon a time, as Kevin Smith will tell you repeatedly, no matter which interview he's ever doing about his career and excessively in the bonus features here, that this is the movie that almost ended his career. After Clerks, which was a no budget, huge surprise success. Like no one, and especially Kevin Smith, could have predicted in a billion years that Clerks would be a fucking game changer for the movie industry. I mean, it was the Blair Witch Project of comedies, basically. You know, it just came out and everybody wanted to make a Clerks.
Yeah.
He follows it up with Mallrats, which is really, on many levels, more of the same, but now with a budget, has few stars in it, although it's weird looking at all the big names in this film that Shannon Doherty was the headline star of this movie. She was the one that everybody knew, and not like Ben Affleck or Jason Lee or anybody. And this was an abject failure. Critics hated it so much they wrote him hate mail about it. Audiences, just nobody went to go see it. He publicly apologized for the existence of this film. All these years later, like, people discovered it and went, this is actually pretty good. It's pretty funny. And I think part of that is like I liked this movie when it came out. I'm not a fan of anything Kevin Smith has done since Chasing Amy, really. But I liked this movie when it came out. And I think that's because I was kind of in a world like Kevin Smith, where I hung out with a bunch of skateboarders and losers who hung out at malls and smoked pot and talked about almost nothing but movies and comic books. This was our world. But it wasn't the rest of the world's world yet. And that's because we didn't have the web yet. And he's like, I think it's because we had the web. And then after 10 years of the web, people were like, oh, that's like pretty much what the web is this world of Mallrats. Like, when this came out, nobody knew who Stan Lee was. That blows my mind. Your average person did not know who Stan Lee was.
Like Jason Lee's double take in the film. Like,
yeah,
he's talking and there's like, are you Stan Lee? And it's like, no, everybody knows who Stan Lee is.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you just know what my mom knows who Stan Lee is. Just by seeing his picture.
Yeah.
Without even his name attached. He's that iconic. This was a time when people did not. So I think this movie, despite of course having some, you know, I mean, it's a tits and ass movie, you know, in the 90s. So it's got some problematic stuff in it, but nothing, I didn't think anything super deeply problematic. And it all has that sort of self-penalizing Kevin Smith mark to it for when it does get that way. But it's two guys who are Jason Lee and Jeremy London, who was the brother of the guy who was the lead character in Dazed and Confused. And they're like, oh, well, look at his brother who looks exactly like him. And that's a smart move, right? I guess. So the two of them both have girlfriends. One's dating Jason Lee's dating Shannon Doherty. Jeremy London's dating Claire Forlani, and they both get dumped on the same day. Like, well, what is there to do but to go to the mall? And the whole movie basically takes place at the mall, and then another cheaper mall, but then back to the main mall, where they deal with a lot of people they know, some they're friends with, some they're enemies with, both of them trying to get their girlfriends back, and culminates in a live dating game type show in the mall that's being thrown by the father of Claire Forlani, who really hates Jeremy London and played really funnily, that's not a word. I think it's not the first time I've tried to use that either. Michael Rooker. And this has got this great cast of people, a lot of which who were not really recognizable at the time, like all the leads for one thing. But Ben Affleck plays kind of the secondary bad guy here. Joey Lauren Adams is in this. Of course, Jay and Silent Bob are in this. Ethan Suplee, Stan Lee with a wonderful little cameo. Scott Mosier. I really genuinely enjoyed rewatching this, but it's probably my third or fourth time watching it, and I gotta admit, my entertainment is always a little lessened each time I see it. Like, yeah, it's what I remember it being. It's funny, it's cute, it's definitely more prescient than anyone realized at the time, but I would be okay with not watching it again.
Yeah, I had revisited it right before Arrow's release. Actually, Arrow's release wasn't on my radar, so I had watched it just a matter of like, I think right in the middle or towards the end of summer had watched it. And then when I revisited Arrows, I watched the extended, which I'd actually seen before. I guess there was a 10th anniversary edition, like back when the film was 10 years old. Then and that had the longer cut, which is not a better cut. It's just kind of there's just more of it. There's especially more at the beginning, kind of setting up the relationship between the guys and their girls and the parents and that sort of thing before they get to the mall. They don't get to the mall fast enough in the extended cut. There's certain movies you just cannot separate yourself from in a way.
Yeah.
And,
like Secret of My Success.
Yeah. Or Gotcha, that it's once it's ingrained in you. There's certain movies you can't separate yourself from. And it's not even a matter of like nostalgia. It's like when you watch the movie, you don't just see the movie, you see a window into who you were at the time that the movie came out, which is different than nostalgia. It's different for me to go, oh, I watched Neverending Story all the time when I was a kid, so I'm going to watch Neverending Story because it reminds me of being a kid. This is really specific in like a weird way of like, it always, that early Kevin Smith stuff, something about it got in my DNA or something, and when I watch it, it's like going through some kind of weird picture box of when I was like not quite 20 or just turned 20. And a lot of this stuff, it's why you understand things like representation matters, even if you're like a cis white dude, is because anything that treated comic books seriously was something that I gravitated towards, if not just like completely celebrated. So a lot of that early Kevin Smith stuff really felt like I was like in some kind of secret club, and he's really done a good job as far as branding that club to make people feel like they're all kind of friends that have all sort of been along for this ride throughout his career, and he's your buddy Kevin Smith, and it's all sort of packaged and branded that way. But it's real weird, and I can't it's hard for me to separate. I think Mallrats in particular is probably, I've also seen Clerks recently. I think Mallrats is kind of shoddy. It's, as a movie, it's shaggy. The Clerks dialogue, something about it works better than applying that same thing. It's like the same type of rhythms and everything sort of shoehorned into like all new characters in a new situation. And it doesn't click into place like it does on Clerks. Like Mallrats, it always feels like people are opening their mouth and saying like a big mealy mouthful of words. Like they're having trouble with the dialogue. And it adds to like an overall kind of shabby, shoddy feel. The Mall feels sort of like the Mall, even though the movie is like, oh, the Mall's like a glorious, wonderful place, it's shot like a mall that's closing.
Yeah.
Like
I think it actually was a mall that was closing. So
it doesn't look like a glorious, wonderful place. It looks like a crappy mall that's like closing down. But it's part of my young fandom, both my movie fandom and like my geekdom, in such a way that I can't be objective about it. Like I can't just go like, oh, that movie sucks, or oh, it's really, really, or neither would I go, oh, it's really, really good. Mm-hmm. I don't know what somebody when did it come out? 95?
Yeah.
So I was either 19 or 20.
I was 25. I'd been living in Austin for 3 years when it came out. So you said this was like your 20s. Strangely, it was like my 19 or 22.
Yeah.
20 also. But I was 25 when I saw it. I was like, wow, this is like me just a few years ago.
Yeah. It's, and I don't know I don't know how it plays for somebody now. I don't know how it plays for somebody now that there's no malls and people know who Stan Lee is. Like, I'd be real interested to find out what a 19 or 20-year-old thinks of Mallrats watching it for the first time today. That would be the perspective that I would want to hear. Yeah. Because I'm sorry, I feel kind of bad. I don't know. I mean, we've talked about it, and I hope that what we've said is interesting, but I don't know that I can add anything to the conversation about this movie in an odd way that I can about other movies.
No, that's fair. I mean, and this package is about as completist as you could want for a look at Mallrats. This is, I can't imagine outside of like if someone ends up wanting to put out a 4K copy of this, which I find unlikely, but there being an upgrade that you'd need more than this one. if you're a fan of this movie, I mean, there's like a 12.5 minute introduction to Kevin Smith, which is totally when he's at his best, when he's doing his self-depreciating humor for the theatrical cut or the extended cut. There is the TV cut here, which is the version where there's basically that famously they did really awful and intentionally awful dubbing to cover up profanities in the film, of which there's quite a bit. So if you want to watch that version, that's there, and there's some slightly different scenes in it as well. There's a cast and crew commentary with Kevin Smith, producer Scott Mosier, archivist Vincent Pereira, actors Jason Lee, Ben Affleck, and Jason Mewes. There's My Mallrats Memories for 30 minutes, which Kevin Smith talking about his memories of making the film. There's My Mallrats, a tribute to Jim Jacks, who was the producer who made it happen, but Kevin Smith talking about his fond memories of him. There's Blunt Talk for 10 minutes with Jason Mewes and his big, crazy-looking fake dentures. There's Hollywood of the North, which is a weirdly barely animated documentary with basically interviews with the Minnesota crew members who worked on the film and their memories. I don't know why they animated it. When We Were Punks, a new director, the director of photography. It says an hour and 2 minutes, 48 seconds of deleted scenes. I don't know what that's about. I started watching it. Most of them were not in great shape. Neither were the outtakes and behind-the-scene footage for 8 minutes and 12 seconds, window box with time codes. There's original cast interviews from the set. There's Erection of an Epic, the making of Mallrats for 22 minutes. There's a Q&A with Kevin Smith, 9 minutes that was done at the 10th anniversary. There's the music video, which is actually pretty cute, for Build Me Up Buttercup, which went with the movie. There's the soundtrack EPK, which is just Kevin Smith and Scott Mosier, an archival piece talking about the songs that are in this. There's a full 2 hours of straight up dailies that were shot in here. I mean, like I said, this is everything that exists. Stills galleries showing the close-ups of comic books from here, behind-the-scenes stills, a collector's booklet with a fold-out poster, replica blueprints for the Operation Drive-By and Operation Dark Knight from the movie with a reversible sleeve featuring the original art and the newly commissioned artwork by artist Robert Samelin. This is, I mean, if you like this movie, this is a great fucking set. It is as complete as you could possibly get. And even I didn't know there's like a 12-minute intro to this film that involves a gunfight that was totally shot and just they didn't put the polish on it, but it's here. You can watch that. Like what that you see totally why they cut it.
I wonder too if, like, you know, when we watch a movie that's like a Roller Boogie or something like that, where it's like, we're just like, that is so 70s. I need to know from someone younger if Mallrats is one of those, where like we look at those disco era, Thank God It's Friday, and those other kind of movies that came out in the disco era that have, you just look at them and go, that is pure 70s up on the screen. I need to know if Mallrats is that. I need to know from somebody younger if Mallrats is like, oh my God, that is so 1995, like from the music to the way they're dressed to the slang to the comic stuff. Like, I want to know if it's if it's become that for younger people.
Is it like how you felt watching American Graffiti?
Yeah, like, oh, that's how it was when my mom was a kid.
Yeah, I guess. You know, I never watched American Graffiti with my parents. I feel like that I missed a good opportunity to, like, ask them, how realistic was this? You know, Dazed and Confused were like my older brothers and sisters. I could just ask them, you know, hey, was that real? Like, oh, yeah. And it's like, I remember watching that and going, wait, this is like 70-something? Because this is exactly what The Last Day of School was like in like 87.
Yeah.
Indistinguishable. But, you know, I lived in Virginia and there were a bunch of deadheads there, so really... There you go. You know what? We're at an hour, so we have to wrap up this episode. But we'll be back very shortly with part 2 of my digital noise conversation with John Golson, where we have a bunch more movies. This was obviously the 80s, 90s edition. And next we'll be getting into some horror movies and a little bit of superhero and big action movies. A lot more stuff. I don't know. You should tune in. I think you might like it. It's pretty good.